The sun had long since stopped being her friend. It hung above the desert like a cruel overseer, beating down on her back until her skin blistered and her lips cracked into blood. Clara Mayfield trudged through the wasteland that used to be their farmland, clutching a frayed Bible to her chest as if it might still call down rain. Once the valley had been green, her father's corn reaching so high it brushed the blue of heaven. But now everything that had once lived was dust. The drought had come without mercy. First the crops withered, then the cattle died, and finally the people. Her father, Reverend Samuel Mayfield, had been the last to surrender. "God will provide," he'd whispered before setting off in search of water. He never came back. Clara buried what little remained of him beneath the dry riverbed, marking the grave with the wooden cross he'd carved for her mother years ago. Now there was no one left. No sound but the wind. No shadow but her own. Clara had been raised to believe that purity was strength, that obedience was grace. But neither faith nor virtue could fill an empty stomach. Her belly gnawed with hunger, her vision blurred, and her body trembled with weakness. For days she had followed the mountains on the horizon, certain that beyond them there must be life. But as the third day came, the sky burned white, and the heat pressed her down to her knees. She dropped the Bible. The pages fluttered like dying wings before the wind carried them away. A strange calmness came over her then. Maybe this was how death arrived, not with pain, but with peace. Her mind began to wander to childhood things. Her mother's laughter, the smell of bread rising in their clay oven, the sound of the church bell calling her home. She closed her eyes and smiled faintly. "I'm coming, Mama," she whispered. Then, a shadow fell across her face. For a heartbeat, she thought she was dreaming. A dark figure blocked out the sun, tall and lean, his body painted in streaks of ochre and ash. The stranger's black hair was bound in leather cords, his bare chest glistening with sweat and dust. A bow hung across his back and at his hip. A knife flashed like a serpent's fang. He crouched beside her, his eyes sharp, amber, and strange, studying her as though she were some rare creature washed ashore. Clara tried to speak, but her throat was dry as sand. Her tongue wouldn't move. The man reached into a pouch and brought water to her lips, letting her drink slowly. The taste was life itself. When she tried to thank him, her voice came out as a croak. "Don't," he said quietly. His English was rough, shaped by another tongue. "Save breath." His name, she would later learn, was Taza, a hunter of the Apache, a people her father had spoken of only in fearful whispers. Savages, he'd called them, men of war and fire. But the one kneeling beside her now did not look cruel. He looked like a man carved from the very earth, fierce and proud, but somehow gentle. She felt herself being lifted into his arms. Her head rested against his shoulder, her cheek brushing his skin. The smell of him, smoke, pine, and something wild filled her senses. She wanted to speak again, to ask why he was helping her, but her eyes rolled back and darkness claimed her. When she woke, the desert had vanished. She lay inside a cool cave, wrapped in a blanket of woven wool. Outside, she could hear the crackle of fire and the soft rhythm of a man's breath. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't cold. She wasn't hungry. But when she turned her head and saw him kneeling by the fire, sharpening his knife under the glow of the flames, she felt something else. Something she had no name for. It wasn't fear. It wasn't gratitude. It was a trembling deep inside her chest, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to her anymore. And though she didn't yet know it, that moment, the moment she opened her eyes to see the Apache who had saved her, was the beginning of everything that would come after. When Clara opened her eyes again, the fire had dimmed to glowing coals and the smell of smoke and roasted meat filled the cave. She tried to sit up, but her body ached too much. A blanket, coarse but warm, slid down her shoulders as her gaze moved to the figure sitting across from her. The Apache was silent, still as stone. His dark hair hung in loose braids, a few eagle feathers woven near the ends. The shadows from the fire danced over his bare chest, where thin scars traced the stories of old battles. His eyes were what struck her most, sharp and watchful like a hawk's that had never known rest. For a moment, she thought he hadn't noticed her stirring. Then, without turning his head, he spoke. "You live." His English was clipped, but his tone carried a certain weight, neither cold nor kind, simply a statement of truth. Clara swallowed hard. You saved me." Taza nodded once, tearing a piece of roasted rabbit and placing it near her. Eat. You are weak. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. The meat was greasy and hot, but she devoured it without shame. Days of starvation had stripped away the manners her father's sermons had drilled into her. Between bites, she whispered, "Why did you help me? You don't even know who I am." At that, he looked up. His amber eyes caught the firelight, gleaming like molten gold. "You were dying," he said. "And you are innocent." "Innocent?" she echoed softly. He tilted his head, considering her. "Not a warrior. Not a liar. You have fear, but no hate." Clara felt her cheeks flush. She had heard of Apache men before, how they raided wagons, how they took what they wanted and burned the rest. Yet this one spoke like a man of judgment, not savagery. His calm unsettled her more than anger would have. "My father said your people don't take kindly to strangers," she said cautiously. Taza's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "Your father speaks from books," he said. "I speak from life." He rose then, tall and lean, his movements quiet as smoke. He went to the cave's entrance and looked out toward the horizon. The light of dawn painted his skin in shades of bronze and gold. Clara saw him lift his hand, touching his thumb and fingers together, murmuring something in a language she didn't know, a prayer maybe. When he turned back, his expression was unreadable. "You will stay here. For now, I hunt. You rest." "I can walk," she protested, though the effort of standing proved her wrong. He looked her over once and simply said, "You fall again, I carry you." Then he vanished into the morning light, silent as a shadow. Left alone, Clara sat in the quiet hum of the cave. She could hear water dripping somewhere deeper inside, could smell herbs drying near the fire pit. He had made this place his home, a secret place carved into the heart of the earth. Her thoughts drifted to the world beyond, her empty farm, her father's grave, the church bell that would never ring again. For the first time, she admitted the truth. She had no home left to go to. Hours later, when he returned with a rabbit and a bundle of wild roots, he found her sitting near the fire, brushing dust from her dress. She looked up timidly. "You could have left me there," she said. "You didn't have to save me." He knelt by the fire, laying his hunt before her. "When the hawk brings back what is wounded, it means something," he said quietly. "The desert took much from me. Maybe it gives something back." His words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither dared to touch. As he cleaned his blade, she found herself watching him not with fear, but with a strange growing curiosity. Every movement he made was deliberate, graceful, as though he and the desert were one. When their eyes met again, something in her heart shifted. It was small, fragile, and entirely forbidden. That night, as the wind howled outside the cave, she whispered a prayer, not to her father's God this time, but to the stars themselves. She prayed she would live long enough to understand this man who had found her in the valley of death. And though she didn't yet know it, the Apache with the hawk eyes was already wondering the same thing about her. When Clara awoke the next morning, sunlight spilled through the cracks in the rock above her, painting golden lines across the cave floor. The air smelled of sage and wood smoke, and for a brief, fragile moment, she forgot she was a lost preacher's daughter in Apache country. The blanket around her shoulders was warm, the fire was still burning, and outside she could hear the steady rhythm of a stream. She pushed herself upright, wincing as soreness rippled through her limbs. Her dress, once pale blue, now clung to her skin in patches of dirt and blood. It had been mended at the seams with thin leather strips. She blinked, confused. Who had? Then she saw him. Taza knelt near the cave mouth, his back to her, sharpening an arrowhead against a stone. His broad shoulders caught the morning light, every muscle and scar etched like sculpture. His movements were deliberate, quiet, and almost reverent. Clara's cheeks flushed. The realization struck her. He must have touched her while she was unconscious, dressing her wounds, sewing her torn dress. Her breath caught between shame and gratitude. "You shouldn't have," she whispered before she could stop herself. Taza turned, the flint knife still in his hand. "Shouldn't have what?" Her voice was soft, trembling. "Mended. My clothes. You should have let me." His gaze flicked over her face, then to the patched fabric. "You could not hold a needle," he said flatly. "You were near death." She faltered. His tone wasn't cruel but absolute. She lowered her eyes, feeling the weight of his presence even from across the cave. He returned to his work, silent again. Only the rasp of stone against flint filled the space. Finally, he spoke without looking up. "You have no fear?" Clara hesitated. "Should I?" Taza's lips curved slightly, almost a smile, though it never reached his eyes. "You are alone, far from your people. You do not know mine." Her heartbeat quickened. "If you meant to harm me," she said quietly, "you would have done it already." That made him look at her. Really look. There was something fierce in his eyes, yes, but also something thoughtful. He studied her as though trying to decide whether her faith was courage or foolishness. After a long silence, he said, "You speak like a bird that does not know it is small." Clara frowned faintly. "And you speak like a man who thinks he can tame one." That earned her the ghost of a smile. He rose and approached the fire, squatting beside it. "You talk much," he said. "That means you live." She couldn't help a quiet laugh, though her throat was dry. He poured water from a skin into a clay bowl and passed it to her. Their hands brushed. The touch sent a spark through her that startled her so much she nearly dropped it. "Drink," he said softly. She obeyed, the cool water easing the ache in her chest. When she handed the bowl back, their eyes met again, and this time, neither looked away. In that suspended breath, she saw something raw in him. The man who had carried her from death wasn't the savage her father's sermons had painted. There was honor in his quiet, patience in his strength, and something older, like the land itself. The air between them shifted. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, not from fear, but from a trembling she couldn't explain. "Why do you help me?" she whispered. Taza looked into the fire, the flames reflecting in his eyes. "Because you are not like the others," he said. "You look at me, but you do not see an enemy." Clara's throat tightened. "And what do you see when you look at me?" He took his time answering. "A spirit that does not belong to this dying valley," he said finally. "A flame that forgot how to burn." The word struck something deep in her, a part of her that had been cold for too long. She didn't know what to say. He rose then, stepping back toward the cave entrance. "Rest," he said simply. "When the sun falls, we hunt." And as he disappeared into the light, Clara pressed a hand to her chest. Her heart was beating too fast, too hard. She told herself it was fear. But somewhere inside, she already knew the truth. It was the first stirrings of something wild, dangerous, and impossible. By the third day in the canyon, Clara had learned the rhythm of his silence. Taza was a man who spoke little and listened to everything. The wind, the caw of ravens, even the soft crunch of her steps behind him. He rose with the dawn, hunted with the patience of a shadow, and returned at dusk with whatever the desert allowed. A hare, a few roots, sometimes nothing at all. At first she had watched from afar, uncertain whether she was his guest, his burden, or his captive. But as the days passed, that question began to matter less. Her body, once frail and weak, grew stronger. Her fear began to dull. And when he taught her how to find water by digging near cactus roots, when he handed her the first knife she had ever held, she realized something. He was giving her not just survival, but a strange kind of freedom. Still, there was a tension between them neither could name. It lingered in the air when his hand brushed hers passing food. It trembled in her chest when she saw him bathe in the stream, the water sliding over his dark, powerful form. That night, the fire burned low and the desert around them fell into its haunting quiet. Taza sat cross-legged, mending an arrow. Clara watched him, pretending not to. Her hunger had dulled, but another kind had taken root, a hollow, restless ache that had nothing to do with food. "Why do you live alone?" she asked softly. He didn't look up. "Because it is easier to speak to the land than to people," She tilted her head. That sounds lonely. His knife paused against the shaft of the arrow. Lonely? He tested the word, as if it were foreign. Then he said, No, peaceful. You don't miss your tribe? Your family? This time his jaw tightened. The flicker of the fire carved deep lines across his face. I had a brother, he said after a pause. He followed the white man's path, took their words, their God. He forgot our ways. His eyes lifted to hers, dark and steady. I will not forget. Clara swallowed. And me? I am the white man's blood. Do you hate me for that? He met her gaze, his silence saying more than words ever could. Finally he murmured, If I hated you, I would have left you in the sand, and the words hit her like a pulse. She looked away, suddenly aware of how close they were, the firelight flickering between them, their shadows merging on the cave wall. Why do you look at me that way? He asked quietly, as if reading her thoughts. Clara's breath caught. I don't know. Taza's voice lowered, rough as gravel. You look at me like I'm a man, not a savage. She lifted her chin, her voice trembling. Because you are. For a long heartbeat, neither moved. Then he set aside his arrow and leaned forward slightly. The firelight turned his eyes to molten gold. I have seen your kind before, he said softly. You fear us, call us beasts, but when I see you, I see a soul that does not belong to the cage you were born in. Her pulse raced. You speak as if you know me. He nodded once. I know hunger. You wear it in your eyes. It is not for food. The cave felt smaller suddenly. The air thickened with something she couldn't name, something she didn't dare breathe too deeply of. She looked down at her hands, her voice shaking. And what is it I'm hungry for, then? He hesitated. Then he said, almost to himself, The same thing I am. Their eyes met again, and the silence that followed was charged, alive. The fire crackled, a cinder falling between them like a warning or an invitation. She tore her gaze away and whispered, I should sleep. He nodded slowly, standing to his full height. Yes. Sleep. But even as she lay down, pulling the blanket over her shoulders, her heart refused to still. She could feel his presence, across the fire, his breath steady, his watchful gaze never straying far from her. And in that long, sleepless night, Clara realized that the hunger inside her had nothing to do with the body's needs. It was something deeper, older, and far more dangerous. The hunger of a heart, learning what it meant to desire. The morning broke with a pale wind sweeping through the canyon, carrying the scent of rain that never came. Clara awoke to the sound of horses in the distance, faint, rhythmic, and unfamiliar. She sat up sharply, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Taza was already awake. He stood near the cave mouth, bow in hand, every muscle drawn tight with awareness. His hawk eyes scanned the horizon. Soldiers, he muttered under his breath. Soldiers, she repeated, her heart quickening. From Fort Sutherland? He didn't answer right away. They ride the valley, searching. For me? For anyone who does not belong. His voice was quiet, but the warning in it was unmistakable. He turned to face her then, and for the first time she saw something she hadn't seen before. Conflict. A war behind his calm eyes. You must leave, he said. The words landed like a stone in her chest. Leave? They will kill you if they find you here. They will kill me for helping you. Clara rose slowly, clutching the wall for balance. I can't survive out there alone. You know that. Taza's jaw tightened. Better to die on your feet than in my arms. His words cut deeper than she expected. Why? She whispered. Why do you care what happens to me if I'm just a burden to you? He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. Because I have already broken my law. I have touched what I should not touch. His eyes traced her face, lingering on her trembling lips. And because I would break it again. The silence that followed was charged so heavy it was almost a physical force. The distant thunder of hooves faded. The only sound left was the wind sighing through the canyon. Clara's throat tightened. Then what happens now? Taza turned away from her and began packing his things. Knives, herbs, a small pouch of dried meat. You cannot stay here. If my people find you, they will say I have dishonored them. You will be punished as a spy. She swallowed hard. And if I go? He paused, the tension in his shoulders visible. Then he faced her again. If you go, the desert will take you. Her voice cracked. So either way, I die. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he walked toward her, each step deliberate, slow. When he stopped in front of her, she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the faint pulse in his throat. He leaned close, his voice low and rough as smoke. There is another way, he murmured. If you make love to me every day, you'll never go hungry again. Clara froze. The words sank into her like a slow burn. She searched his face, expecting to see cruelty there. But what she saw instead was something deeper. Not lust, not arrogance, but hunger. The same hunger she'd seen reflected in herself. Her lips parted, her breath trembling. That's not a fair bargain. It is not a bargain, he said softly. It is a promise, she shook her head, backing away a step. You're asking me to... He caught her wrist gently, his grip firm but not forceful. I ask nothing, he said. You choose. Stay and live as my woman, or leave and face death in the sands. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She could feel the truth of his words. The desert beyond the canyon would devour her. But this promise he offered, terrified her in a different way. She wanted to hate him for it, for the way he looked at her as though she already belonged to him. But what she felt wasn't hate. It was a pull, a deep instinctive pull that defied reason and faith alike. Her voice broke as she whispered, Why me? Taz's expression softened. Because you looked at me like I was a man. He released her wrist. No one has done that in a long time. Clara's breath caught. She turned away, tears welling without understanding why. Outside, the storm began to break. Wind swept through the canyon, scattering ash and sand, moaning like a wounded spirit. Behind her, Taz's voice came again, quiet, almost reverent. You are free to go, Clara Mayfield. But if you stay... He paused, his words like thunder before lightning. Then your hunger ends with me. And though the wind howled and her heart raced with fear, she did not run, because somewhere, buried beneath everything she had been taught, something inside her whispered back. That maybe, just maybe, it already had. The wind that night was restless. It howled down from the cliffs like a chorus of ghosts, shaking the dry grass at the mouth of the canyon. The small fire between them struggled to hold its flame, flickering low before flaring bright again, as though it too fought to stay alive. Clara sat close to the wall of the cave, her arms wrapped around her knees. She could still hear Taz's voice from earlier echoing in her mind. If you make love to me every day, you'll never go hungry again. The words refused to leave her. They twisted through her thoughts like smoke, half promise, half sin. He had gone silent since then. He sat on the other side of the fire, cross-legged, head bowed, carving a strip of wood into the shape of an arrow. His movements were steady, controlled, but she could sense the tension in him, the battle he fought with himself. Outside, thunder grumbled in the distance. The sky flickered white, then black again. Clara's heart beat to that rhythm. Unsteady, frightened, curious, she whispered, Do you mean it? Taza didn't look up. Mean what? Her voice trembled. What you said, that if I stay I must... She couldn't finish. Now he did look at her. His eyes were dark, unreadable, lit only by the glow of the fire. I meant that you will not starve again, he said slowly. That I will protect you, feed you, shelter you, and... His voice lowered, almost a growl. I will take what you freely give, her pulse leapt. And if I give nothing? He set down the knife, rising to his full height. Then you remain a stranger, he said. And strangers cannot stay. Clara looked away, tears stinging her eyes. You make it sound like love is a trade. Taz's footsteps crossed the cave softly. When she looked up, he was standing before her, close enough that she could feel his heat. Not a trade, he said. A bond. She rose unsteadily, her back brushing the cold stone. And what happens if I say yes? He searched her face, his expression raw. Then I will be bound to you. By my word, my body, my life. Lightning flashed, filling the cave with white light. For an instant she saw the depth of his eyes. The ache, the restraint, the hunger barely contained. Then darkness returned, and the only light left was fire. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know how to give what you ask. Taza reached out, his hand hovering near her face, trembling slightly before it found her cheek. His fingers were calloused, warm, careful. "Then I will teach you," he murmured. The world outside vanished, the wind, the storm, the hunger. All fell away until there was only the fire between them and the heat rising higher than either dared to breathe. When his lips found hers, it wasn't rough. It wasn't the taking she had feared. It was a question, a slow, aching question she had no words to answer. Her fingers, almost without will, reached up to his shoulders. The strength beneath her touch startled her, the warmth of his skin making her tremble harder. He pulled back only a breath away, his forehead resting against hers. "Say the word," he whispered, "and I will stop." Clara's heart pounded so loudly she thought it might break her. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She only pressed closer, closing the space between them. That was all the answer he needed. The fire burned low as the storm broke outside. Rain began to fall. Soft at first, then harder, drumming against the rocks. In that small cave, two lost souls found the one thing the desert had denied them both: warmth. When it was over, she lay with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. He traced her hair with gentle fingers, his voice rough and quiet. "You are not mine," he said almost to himself, "but I am yours now." Clara closed her eyes, exhaustion mingling with something far deeper. She should have felt guilt, fear, shame. But all she felt was a strange peace, like the world had finally gone quiet. And as the fire flickered and the rain washed over the canyon, she realized the truth of his promise. She would never hunger again, not for food, not for warmth, not for life, because something far greater had already begun to feed her soul. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and quiet. The canyon glistened under a silver sky, every rock and branch beaded with drops of rain. Inside the cave, the fire had died to embers, but its faint warmth lingered, along with the memory of what had happened there. Clara woke to the sound of birds. For a long moment she didn't move. Her cheek rested against Taza's bare chest, and his arm was still wrapped around her waist protectively, as though even in sleep he feared she might disappear. She drew a slow breath, the scent of smoke, rain, and him filling her senses. Then the realization hit, what they had done. Her body went rigid. The ache between her thighs was proof enough that it hadn't been a dream. She had given herself to an Apache warrior, a man the world had warned her to fear, and yet she felt no regret. Only a tremor of confusion deep in her chest. Taza stirred, sensing her tension. His eyes opened slowly, dark, steady, and alive with something that softened when it met her gaze. "You're awake," he murmured, voice still husky from sleep. Clara quickly sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "We shouldn't have," she began, but the words died when she saw the gentleness in his face. He sat up too, resting his elbows on his knees. "You think it was wrong?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I was taught that a woman's virtue is all she has." Taza's brow furrowed. "Virtue?" he repeated as if testing the word in his tongue. "In my people's ways, virtue is the strength of one's spirit, not what is done between man and woman." Clara looked away, her fingers twisting in the blanket. "But the world won't see it that way." He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "The world has not been kind to you, Clara. Why care what it thinks now?" The simple truth of it cut deep. Tears welled in her eyes unbidden. He reached out, catching one with his thumb before it fell. "Do not cry," he said. "You were not taken. You chose." That made her heart ache more. "Did I?" she whispered. "You made me an offer, Taza. Food, safety, a place to live. What if I only said yes because I was desperate?" His gaze didn't waver. "Then let it be desperation," he said. "But you still said yes. And I would never use hunger to hold you. If you wish to go, you may." Her breath caught. "You'd let me leave?" He nodded once. "At dawn you can go where you please. But if you stay, then you stay as my equal, not my prisoner." The words stunned her. She had expected control, maybe even dominance. Instead, he offered freedom. That more than anything terrified her, because it meant that now she had to decide, truly decide what she wanted. They shared a silent meal of roasted rabbit and berries he had gathered at dawn. She couldn't help but notice how he gave her the larger portion, keeping little for himself. He didn't meet her eyes while she ate, as though sensing she needed the space to think. When she finished, she finally asked, "Why me?" He looked at her then, long and hard. "Because I saw a woman who would not break," he said simply. "Not when the storm came, not when hunger clawed at her. I saw fire in you." It called to mine. Clara's chest tightened. His words felt like a promise and a warning. By midday, the sun broke through the clouds, spilling light into the canyon. Clara stepped outside, feeling the warmth touch her skin. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. Behind her, Taza spoke quietly. "If you wish to go, the trail leads north. But if you wish to stay, help me rebuild the shelter before the next rain." She turned slowly, meeting his gaze. For a heartbeat, the world was still. Then she found herself saying the words before she even understood them. "I'll stay." Taza nodded once, the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. That night she didn't sleep out of fear, but anticipation. The bond between them had changed. It was no longer about survival or hunger. It was about choice and the dangerous, beautiful freedom that came with it. Days turned into weeks. The canyon grew quieter as spring gave way to summer, and the bond between Clara and Taza deepened like roots pressing into the earth. They lived simply, hunting, mending, trading warmth for laughter and silence for peace. Each morning, he left to hunt, and each evening he returned with food, his skin bronzed by the sun, his eyes always finding hers first. She learned his language little by little, soft syllables that felt like river water in her mouth. Sometimes he would tease her when she mispronounced a word. Other times he would look at her in that way that made her heart stumble, but the peace could not last. Not in a world that still drew sharp lines between his blood and hers. It began one afternoon when Taza spotted distant smoke rising beyond the ridge. He tensed, motioning for her to stay low. Clara's heart thudded as he scanned the horizon, every line of his body alert. "Riders," he muttered. "White men, soldiers," her blood ran cold. "Here?" he nodded grimly. "They hunt my people, and they will not spare you if they find you with me." Fear prickled through her, but beneath it was anger. "After everything you've done for me, how can they still hate you?" Taza's jaw tightened. "They do not see men, only enemies." He began to pack quickly. Skins, food, water flasks. "We go before they reach the canyon." Clara hesitated. "But this is our home." His eyes softened, though his hands didn't stop moving. "A home can be rebuilt. A life cannot." They left before dusk, climbing higher into the cliffs. From there she could see the line of riders in the valley below, blue coats glinting in the sun. There were 10, maybe 12 of them. Her heart twisted as she realized they were heading straight for the cave they'd shared. By nightfall, they found shelter in a narrow crevice between the rocks. Taza spread a blanket for her and sat at the mouth of the hollow, watching the darkening valley below. His posture was calm, but she could feel the weight of tension in him. She crept closer. "You've seen them before, haven't you?" He nodded once. "Years ago. Before they killed my father," her breath caught. He rarely spoke of his past. "How did it happen?" Taza's eyes stayed on the horizon. "He led our band away from the soldiers. Told them he would meet them alone, talk peace. They shot him before he could speak." Clara's heart ached. "I'm sorry." He looked at her then, the firelight catching the lines of his face. "Do not be. He died as a warrior. But his death taught me something. Mercy is not always returned." She reached out, laying her hand over his. "And yet you still showed me mercy." He turned his hand, their fingers intertwining. "You were not my enemy," he said softly. "You were lost." The warmth in his tone undid her. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his shoulder. "If they find us, what will you do?" "Protect you," he said simply. "No," she whispered fiercely. "We protect each other." That made him smile, just barely. "You are learning the ways of my people." She smiled too, but it faded as distant thunder echoed. Not from the sky, but from hooves below. The soldiers had reached the canyon floor. The faint shouts carried on the wind. Taza rose, grabbing his bow. "They will find the tracks," he said. "We must move before dawn." Clara stood, heart pounding. "Then let's go together." He looked at her for a long time, as though memorizing her face. "You are brave," he said. "Too brave for the world that waits beyond these cliffs." She stepped closer, her voice firm. "I'm not leaving you, Taza. Whatever comes, whatever they do, we face it together." He drew her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "Then we fight as one," he whispered. Below them, the soldiers' torches flickered like fireflies in the night. Above, the stars burned bright and cold. Between those two lights, one born of destruction, one of eternity. They stood together, their shadows entwined, ready for whatever the dawn might bring. And in that moment, Clara understood something deeper than fear. She had once been a girl who begged for food. Now she stood beside a man who would give his life for her, and no hunger in the world could ever compare to that kind of love. The night was long and restless. Clara and Taza moved through the canyon shadows like ghosts, silent and alert. Every sound, the crack of a twig, the cry of a hawk, made Clara's heart leap. Behind them, the soldiers' torches flickered brighter, spreading across the valley floor like a line of hungry fire. They could not outrun horses forever. Taza knew it. Clara knew it. By the time the first hint of dawn touched the sky, they reached a narrow pass between two cliffs. Beyond it lay open desert, freedom if they could reach it. But the echo of hooves grew louder. Taza crouched low, scanning the rocks. "We make our stand here," he said. Clara's stomach tightened. "No, we can still run." He shook his head. "They will track us by the prints. Here, the land fights with us. Stones, narrow ground. I know every path." He looked at her then, his expression steady but sad. "Clara, if I fall, you must not stop." "Don't you dare say that," she whispered fiercely. "We're both leaving this place." He gave a small, sad smile. "You speak like a warrior now." They climbed to a higher ledge. Taza laid his bow across his knees, checking the string. Clara gathered small rocks, handing them to him as arrows. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to be calm. When the first soldier appeared at the mouth of the pass, Taza didn't move. He waited until the man dismounted, scanning the rocks below. Then, with a single motion, he loosed the arrow. It struck the soldier square in the shoulder. Shouts erupted below. The others charged forward. Taza drew again, faster this time. One arrow flew, then another. Two horses reared, their riders falling hard. Clara ducked as bullets cracked against the stone near her head, scattering dust. Her breath came quick and sharp. "Stay low!" Taza shouted, firing again. She obeyed, pressing herself against the rock wall, covering her ears from the noise. But she couldn't stay hidden for long. One of the soldiers had climbed up the side, his boots scraping on stone. She saw his rifle rising before she even thought. She grabbed a rock and hurled it with all her strength. It struck his face. He stumbled, lost his grip, and fell backward with a scream. Taza turned at the sound, eyes flashing. "Good," he called, proud. "Do not stop fighting." But there were too many. More soldiers poured into the pass. Their numbers pressed forward, shouting orders, firing wildly. Smoke and dust filled the air. An explosion of rock threw Clara backward. The bullet had struck inches from where she'd been. Her ears rang. Her vision blurred. Through the haze, she saw Taza leap from one ledge to another, his movement swift, almost otherworldly. Then, an awful sound. The sharp cry of pain she'd never forget. "Taza!" He staggered, clutching his side. Blood spilled between his fingers, dark against his skin. Clara crawled to him, dragging the blanket from her shoulders to press it against the wound. No, stay still, don't you move." He grabbed her hand, holding it tight. "Enough," he gasped. "There are too many." Tears streamed down her face. "I won't leave you." He smiled weakly, his breathing shallow. "You must. For both of us." Below, the soldiers were regrouping. Their shouts grew louder. Taza took her face in his bloodied hand. "Clara, promise me one thing." "What?" She sobbed. "Live," he whispered. "Even if I do not live." She shook her head violently. "I can't without you." He leaned forward, pressed his forehead to hers. "Yes, you can. You will." Then he stood, using the last of his strength, bow in hand. He faced the pass, fire in his eyes. "Go," he said. Clara hesitated, then, heartbreaking, she turned and ran up the narrow ridge. Behind her, she heard his final war cry, fierce and defiant, the sound of arrows, then gunfire. When the dawn finally broke over the canyon, Clara collapsed on the far ridge, tears streaking her face. Below, smoke rose from the pass. The soldiers were gone. The land was silent again. She crawled to the edge, trembling. There, far below, lay Taza, still his body draped in the rising light. The wind carried her whisper down to him. "You kept your promise. I'll never be hungry again." And as the sun climbed higher, the desert held its breath, mourning but also bearing witness to a love that no bullet could destroy. Weeks passed after that morning. The sun still rose over the canyon. The wind still sang through the stones, but to Clara, the world had gone quiet. She buried Taza herself, high on the ridge where the hawks circled and the wind never stopped moving. She marked his grave with a single carved stone, etched with the symbols he had shown her. One for fire, one for love, one for freedom. Every dawn, she sat beside it, whispering his name until her voice broke. The pain never dulled, it only changed shape. Yet through her tears, she remembered his final words. Live. So she did. Clara rebuilt the shelter they'd once shared. She hunted the small game he had taught her to track. She fished the river with the nets they had woven together. At night, she made a fire and spoke to him as if he were there beside her, telling him about the day, about the sound of the coyotes, about how the stars had begun to feel like eyes watching over her. But as the moon cycles passed, she began to notice the change in her body, the faint sickness in the mornings, the tenderness in her belly, the sense of something small and sacred growing within. At first, she was afraid to believe it. Then one evening, when the sunset bled gold across the canyon, she placed her hand over her stomach and felt it, the flutter. Soft like the beat of a bird's wings, her tears came freely, but they were not just of sorrow. You didn't leave me, she whispered. You're still here. From that day, she found a new strength. She gathered more food, built stronger walls for the shelter, lined the sleeping place with soft hides. Her hands, once trembling with grief, grew sure again. She sang the Apache lullabies Taza had taught her, their rhythm steady as the heartbeat she now carried inside her. Months later, when the first snow fell, she gave birth alone in the cave where they had first made love. It was hard, long, fierce, and full of pain, but when it was done, she held a tiny boy in her arms. His skin was warm and dark, his eyes impossibly deep. When he opened them for the first time, she saw Taza in him, his calm, his fire, his strength. Your father was a great man, she told him through tears. He gave everything to protect us. She named him Talon, for the hawk that circled over the ridge the morning after Taza's death. In the months that followed, word of the woman living alone among the cliffs began to spread. Traders who passed through the territory spoke of her, the pale woman with the Apache child who could hunt like a warrior and heal with herbs like a medicine woman. Some called her cursed, others called her blessed, but Clara didn't care what they said. She had found peace, and a purpose far deeper than survival. Every year on the anniversary of his death, she and her son climbed to the ridge. She would light a fire beside Taza's grave, and Talon would ask the same question. Will I ever meet him? She would smile, brush the boy's hair from his face, and say, You meet him every day, in the way you walk, in the way you stand, in the fire that burns in your heart. As Talon grew, he became the bridge between two worlds, white and Apache, mother and father, love and loss. He carried the blood of both, but the spirit of neither alone, and through him, Taza's people lived on. When Clara grew old and her hands began to tremble, she would sit beneath the same tree that shaded his grave. She would close her eyes and remember the feel of his arms, the sound of his voice whispering promises in the dark, and when her time finally came, she was not afraid. They buried her beside him under the same open sky, where the wind still spoke in the language of the canyon. Travelers who passed through that land generations later would sometimes pause when they reached the ridge. They'd see two graves side by side, one marked with the Apache symbols of fire and love, the other with a single carving of a hawk, and they'd feel it, even if they couldn't name it. A story written not in words but in blood, wind, and heart. A story of a woman who was hungry once and of the Apache who taught her that love could feed a soul forever.